have time for questions. We have half an hour, so I open the floor for questions. Yes, sir.
I would like to pose a question for Mr. McCarthy. In your opinion, sir, how much effect did the Russian Revolution have on the Turkish Revolution as well as on Atatürk?
I think the main effect the Russian Revolution had on the Turks, on the Turkish Revolution, was financial. The main effect was to provide the Turks with much needed money and equipment that allowed them to fight, especially the Greeks. You can also say that it had an effect in fighting the Armenians, but that really wasn't a great effect. Kazım Karabekir managed to defeat the Armenians all by himself without any help. So I'd say financial primarily.
Thank you.
Professor Rice.
Professor McCarthy, I'd like to add something to what you have said based on some recent research I've been doing. When Atatürk was an officer of junior rank, either a lieutenant or a captain, serving in the Third Army in Salonika, he had two buddies who lived near him, and they used to spend many, many hours at the local eateries talking about what is to be, philosophizing, etc. One of these people was Vahich Erkin, who became, later on, Minister of the Railroads, Ambassador to Hungary, and after that, Ambassador to France. First of all, I'd like to say that Vahich Erkin is a good exemplar of issues of moral compass, issues of conscience, issues of intellect. He is known to have gone against Atatürk's orders and told him so, and got away with it. When Atatürk asked Vahich Erkin to move the troops on railroads during the Independence War in a given period of time, Vahich Erkin apparently replied, "I cannot do it. If you want that done, get somebody else to do it." Atatürk said, "Go ahead and do as you see fit." And so it came to pass that Erkin moved the troops and the war was won. And many troops, as he said, over great distances. Vahich Erkin became ambassador to France in 1939, August 31, 1939. Next day, the Nazis invaded Poland, beginning of World War II. While he was ambassador to Turkey, by his leadership and by his moral compass, he got the entire legation to save Jews with having Turkish origin. Not just those holding Turkish passports, having had anything to do with Turkey in their background. They were issued certificates strictly on the strength of repeating something like 6 or 10 words. You are Turkish, my parents, I am Turkish, my parents were born in Turkey, and just so on, so on. Now this was not the policy of Ankara at the time to save Jews. I have documented that in my next book. He did it on his own. And people under his direct charge, including Necdet Kent, the father of the president of Coca-Cola, when following their conscience, following their moral compass, following their courage, saving Jews in France. The bottom line is, that no more than 8% of Jews with Turkish origin went to the camps and the crematoria, whereas the total Jewry of France lost over 25%. I'm trying to get Behich Erkin and his cohorts to be given the honor by the Yad Vashem, a Jewish and Israeli agency. By the way, I might add to this that Behich Erkin was raised by his uncle because the father left the family. So he was raised by an uncle. In turn, he adopted a niece whom he had raised.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wolfgang?
I'd like to add something to Professor Reisman's statement. I appreciate, we all do appreciate Behich Erkin's attitude, but I also like to remind him that not only in the Turkish Republic, but back in 1492, starting with the Ottoman Empire, was the only country to open up the to hug the Jewish immigrants running away from the Spanish Inquisition. And same thing after the Second World War. You might have taken initiative, but it was the Turkish government's policy, a very tough policy at the time, I would like to remind you. And most of the universities and some of the departments, including Istanbul University, was established by the Jewish immigrants who ran away from Hitler at the time. One question that I have that I would like to hear, I didn't, especially for Professor Gorich and McCarthy, I would like it very much if they could comment on. That the Turkish Republic is one of the very few countries in that region who was able to stand up strong against that whole area, that whole region, as you would know, that there's big conflict going on throughout the history, actually. I personally think one of the reasons why we became a strong nation, why the Turkish Republic is a strong nation, is because it was a secular country. And also the initiative coming from Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. How would you agree with this statement, sir? The reason I ask is because some of the government officials here in Europe, they talk about moderate Islam. I'm a believer. I'm a believer in the secular government. And but without having that influence, and as a secular government, I think Turkish Republic was able to accomplish a lot. Since I haven't heard this or similar statements from anybody here, I would like to know what you think about this. Thank you.
Well, the reason I didn't say anything about the secular republic is I was only speaking about up to the end of the Independence War. As a historian, primarily an Ottoman historian, I've noticed that I should say, first of all, I myself believe in a secular state. I believe in a system where religion and state and government are separate. I think that's important. Religion can enlighten people's minds, but I believe that it should not be part of the government. Having said that, I must say that as a historian, I look at Turks in the time of the Ottomans, I look at Turks in times of the Seljuks, and even in Central Asia, not simply Turks in times of the Republic, and sometimes they appear to be fairly religious. Sometimes they appear, such as with the Bektashis, to have a very different sort of religion. And sometimes they appear to have almost no religion at all. But they always seem to have their honor. They always seem to have their respect for what's important. They always seem to be great fighting men. So I have a feeling that that is so important that it almost overwhelms everything else about them. Your turn.
One thing that I found interesting in looking at the interwar period is that there were a number of Arab officers who rose up to high rank. A couple of them conducted coups, and they looked at Atatürk as an example during that interwar period of a person who had courage, who fought for independence and won, whereas they had to experience colonial rule. Best example would be Anwar Sadat. He grew up with great respect for Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. But post-World War II, his image has changed in the Middle East. I think it's been more negative. I don't know what it is now recently. So that what I'm saying is that during a certain period of time, people in the Middle East understood and appreciated what he had done, and leaders modeled themselves upon him. I think the idea of the secularism part is more important in developing the seeds and the legacy for when he dies. Because as a person in power, he could have done what he needed to do, obviously with some compromises. But he was building a Turkey that was secular, and I think secularism is important to separate religion from politics, to make it a matter of private conscience. And if I hear the word moderate Islam, my idea is moderate in the sense of the believer, making it a matter of private conscience rather than one of politics. I think the idea that there's an intellectual problem when you bring in religion into politics because it connects it then to the divine, which means immutable principles, and that becomes a problem when you try to create pluralism, exchange of ideas. And Iran is the best example where you have an Islamic state with a theology based on religion, and the mullahs have lost so much credibility among the population because of the linking of religion to politics and then abusing it and using it, because I think the message of religion is it's a mystery. It's hard to know what God wants. It's hard to know it's hard to know how the world has been created. So some would argue that mine is a Western viewpoint, but I think the secularism that Atatürk brought is essential for society to develop. When you bring into it pluralism, when you bring into the freedom of thought, those are important means for which a society can find its creativity in more and more people. And it has been a strength, I think, but it's never perfect. I think some would argue, we've been hurting as a democracy. Rich people run this country, Wall Street runs this country. Can we redefine America to make it so that the average person has more say in it? And that's a problem with democracy. It's an ongoing struggle. Democracy is never perfect. But the secularist, I would say, I would agree, Professor McCarthy, it is important to make religion a matter of private conscience and not to try to encourage moderate religious policies as state policies when we wouldn't want it in our own country.
I have an answer to several of your questions. First of all, there's no doubt in my mind that one of Atatürk's vision in making the country secular and imbuing the army with the notion of secularism was because he envisioned that left unattended through the democratic process, Turkey will become as did Iran and as did Afghanistan. And the fact that Turkey is still a nation is part of one of those visions. Another item, yes, in between the wars, there was a group of over 190 intellectuals who were invited by government policy to Turkey to create Istanbul University, to rewrite some of the laws, to institute Western medical care, library practices, and etc. The next question I think you raised is the notion that in 1492, Sultan Bayezid invited boatloads of Jews that Spain was discarding. Those Jews came and settled throughout the Ottoman Empire in what is now Turkey and what is now Greece, Salonika in particular. There were at least 5 generations, I know, of Jewish doctors that served the court. People who were brought in from Spain. Speaking of Behich Erkin, if I may, the Jewish community in Salonika was no different than what was called the regular Jewish community in France, namely people who were Sephardi, of Spanish origin. There was an ambassador in Greece during the World War II, Turkish ambassador in Greece. There was a consul general in Salonika. The entire Jewish community of Salonika was wiped out. So it couldn't have been a policy of Ankara at the time to save Jews. It was Behich Erkin's moral compass and conscience against all odds, risk to their careers and their lives that did it.